this computer. Well, good morning, fellas.
Morning.
Good morning, Mike.
Hey, everybody. This morning, today is May 6th, 2020, moving right along. We're continuing our study in John's Gospel, and to look at review from last week, we looked at this story in Cana where the man's son becomes deathly ill in Capernaum and makes the 20 to 25 mile walk up to Cana and meets Jesus, and really interesting interaction. What we talked about last week is how this man had to apply faith by receiving the words of Jesus and then turning away in the opposite direction and moving back to Cana just on the words of Jesus that his son was healed. And by putting ourselves in his sandals, we could identify with how this man must have felt. And he went back, walking back, and the next afternoon, several hours had transpired, possibly a whole day, an evening, and then sometime during the next morning, his house staff met him on the road and gave him the good news. So that's a good story. And so today, what we're gonna do is move on and look at verses 1 through 9. And if somebody could read this text.
After these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called a Hebrew Bethesda,
Yep.
having 5 porticos. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. A man who was there who had been ill for 38 years, when Jesus saw him laying there and knew that he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, "Do you wish to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet and walk." Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. I can't really see the last part of that verse.
It says, now it was the Sabbath day, like a postscript. It was the Sabbath day that when this took place. So thanks, Dick, for reading that.
Sure.
This is, again, a fascinating story that takes place early on in John's gospel account. We'll go into more detail of the setting in the next couple of slides, but one interesting fact regarding translation and interpretation in this text is verse 4. Some of you, I think Tatsi reads out of the NIV, and in Tatsi's Bible, if he's using the NIV, good morning, Everett. Notice verse 4. Verse 4 is not it's actually a footnote, because this text is questionable whether it was part of the original John's account or added later for description. And so in the NASB, of which Dick read from, it's there, giving an explanation of why the people were there at the pool, but in the NIV, they just footnote it. So that's just an interesting aside. I don't really want to dive into that, how all that happens, and how they determine what makes it and what doesn't, but it's an interesting aside in this particular text.
It's also in the authorized.
Yeah, it's in the authorized. That's why it's in the NASB. we could go into a long discussion about that, but we're going to leave that for another day. So before we begin, I want to take like the 30,000 foot view and kind of look at where we've been in John's gospel account thus far, and how John is organizing these snippets of information to portray and to explain what he's trying to explain to his first century hearers. There are four encounters thus far in the gospel account. The first one we saw in chapter 3, where we saw Jesus have a night visit with a socially advantaged individual, Nicodemus. And then the next story moved to the woman in the beginning portions of most of chapter 4 is the woman at the well. And notice the contrast, socially advantaged to socially marginalized. And we talked about that at the time. Then last week, we looked at the royal official with the sick son in Capernaum. He is also a royal official. He is socially advantaged. This morning, we're going to look at the converse of that, a crippled man in Jerusalem. And again, like the woman, he is socially marginalized, not because of his political or heritage, as would be true of the Samaritan woman, but because of his physical condition. And I think what we need to just pause and look at for a minute is what this message would have portrayed to the first century readers. It would have portrayed that the gospel of Jesus Christ is great news, and it is inclusive to all peoples, from the socially advantaged to the socially marginalized. And God and John has emphasized that by giving us 4 stories, 2 of each. So I just think that's an interesting thing to highlight before we move in about receiving Jesus. So what can we observe from this story? Number one, after these things, it's quoted out of verse 1, I'm using the term John teleports Jesus and his team from Cana up in northern Galilee. He spent over a chapter explaining how they got there. They're there for just a couple of days, and then John just pulls them out of that context. Certainly, there was a lot more that happened in Cana, but John doesn't describe that. He teleports Jesus and his team back to Jerusalem for this festival. Now, the reason he's done this is for some reason we have yet to discover, and so that's what one of the contributing factors that makes this is also interesting. Number 2, the story takes place during one of the Jewish feast events, and a festival was over days, not just hours. You know, you just didn't get together for like we do Thanksgiving meal. It was the people would gather in Jerusalem for a series of days and for these festival events. 2 in the spring, Passover, Pentecost, and then Tabernacles later on, which would be in the fall along with Yom Kippur. So there were spring events and fall events. The location is near the Sheep Gate, which is right here on the screen. It is actually the entrance today called Lion's Gate or Stephen's Gate. It's called by both. It's actually still in use. And in those days, it was called the Sheep Gate because that is where, right near the Temple Mount, that's where they brought in the temple offerings from the outside of the city to be brought into the temple area for sacrifice. So it was called the Sheep Gate. The Pool of Bethesda is right here and right inside the gate. Here is the old walled city, roughly like this. This is, if you were to go walk the walls of Jerusalem today, this is what you'd walk, that area right there. And so here we are. at this pool inside the city gate. Bethesda means house, Beit, house, Beth. Hesed is the Hebrew term for God's loving mercy. So it's house of mercy. This is a place of mercy where people would receive healing. Interesting, the numeric value 5 is known throughout Scripture as one depicting the grace of God. So here we have Jesus come, and there are 5 5 porches at Bethesda. So it all lines up interesting that this is a place of mercy, this place of waiting where people would come with their infirmities and they would wait for this stirring of the water, and there would be mercy administrated at this particular location. That's the context. Note once again the presence of water in the narrative. We've seen water in John chapter 2, where the water turns into wine. We've seen it in chapter 4, where it's a living water. And now we're seeing it now in chapter 5, water once again. What we can continue to observe, number 3, Jesus enters this place of, and I'm renaming it, the waiting for the stirring of the waters. And it really shows, guys, in my opinion, the human condition that we are in as wounded in our infirmities and waiting for something to change. And that's where, I mean, these people would come and just be there day after day. And Jesus meets this man who had actually been in this condition for 38 years. What we don't know is if he's been there at the pool for 38 years, but he's been in this condition. And Jesus asks him the question, do you want to get well? The man responds to the question by stating, I have no man to put me in the pool. And he then just starts to describe his frustration that he is incapacitated. He's there waiting for the stirring. He's got hope, but yet he is incapacitated to move his body to the water, to be first in the water to receive the healing. And that's his frustration, that someone always gets there before him, but yet he waits there for something to change. Jesus doesn't go into that. He does not pity him. He says 3 things: get up, take up your pallet or his bedroll, his mat, his sleeping bag, if you will, and walk. 3 things. Let's analyze those 3 statements. Get up. What Jesus is saying to the man is, now we look at this as a command. I don't know how it's depicted in the cinema when this takes place, but I rather to see it as an invitation for the man to change his state. His state is in the prone position. He's lying down. And Jesus is inviting the man to move to the standing position, to change his state in life. Same invitation that you and I and all of mankind receive, or is available through the gospel of Christ, from moving from a prone state to a standing state, that life can get better. It is good news. And Jesus is inviting this man to change his state. The second statement, take up your pallet. Roll up your mat, he says. Roll up your mat and take it with you. This instruction is in contrast to what Jesus could have said, leave your mat behind. Leave it here. Forget it. it's now no longer part of your life. He doesn't say that. He says, take your mat with you. The mat represents his prior state. The mat must be integrated and become part of the man's story. The mat is part of this man's story. And from here forward, everything within my being wants to reject my weaknesses, my sins, the wounds that I have incurred, the wounds that I have given to others. But Jesus, and that's all depicted by the mat of what my former state was a decade ago, last week, yesterday, this morning, what it was before. But Jesus is saying, no, take your mat with you and integrate it as it becomes part of your story. And why do you think, I've been gabbing here, why do you think Jesus, what value does this bring to our story to bring our mat with us? I'll just throw that out. What do you guys think?
I think that that's part of what Jesus wants us to do when we witness, is to tell people where we were and how he's brought us out of that, how he's delivered us out of that life of sin.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I was just going to say, I think it's just part of the man's story, which is what Patsy just said.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that the word tells us that God forgets our sins. He throws them as far as the east is from the west. But for us, we have to realize those are forgiven, but we have to remember them so we don't go back to them like the dog to the vomit. We know what they are, but we have to realize that we are a changed person. We've gone from prone to standing, and that change has allowed us, to move forward, which is what he's about to say, walk.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want us to forget what we've done in the past as mistakes, but also those things for which we're forgiven, so we see how great a grace that God's offered us.
Maybe it could be like a reference. If we left the mat at the pool, we wouldn't have the reference. But if we have that roll with us right here, it facilitates reference for the future. And then, as you said, Jeff, his next word is walk. And walk represents moving from the current place forward, carrying the mat. Really in a different way of what you just said, Jeff, as far as carrying the mat with him. So get up, take up your pallet, and walk. Now, the outcome in verse 9 is immediately the man became well, changed his current state, picked up his pallet, and began to walk, carrying out the invitation of Jesus. And then finally, what Dick read to us, this postscript that's added as introduction for the next text that we'll look at next week, because that's really the setting of how John places this story in the larger story that he's going to go into next week. It was the Sabbath day on which this took place, but that's just an introduction. We'll leave that for next time. I wanted to leave plenty of time. We're right on time, 20 minutes, because I'd like for us to go to table time. And here's where, once again, because of the idiosyncrasies of Zoom, I'm not able to share this slide when we go into our rooms, our breakout rooms. So if you could snap a photo of this slide, this will be the picture. This will be what you'll be discussing in your breakout rooms in just a few minutes. Which of these invitations and their respective implications is most meaningful to you at this time in your journey? Is the term get up, the term pick up your pallet, or the term walk? Which one of those three of Jesus's invitations is most meaningful to you? So I'm going to break you guys up now into, I feel so powerful, to do the breakout rooms, and it'll be random, just like always. So I'm setting it up here, and then it's 7:20. So you guys will, I'll bring you back together a little bit before 8 o'clock. So 4 rooms, I've got 4 rooms set up, 3 persons per each. So have a great time. And I'll be joining one here in just a little bit. Here we go.
Here.
Hi, fella.
Was it coming in? All right.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm coming to group 4 today. So what I usually do is see if there's an odd, uneven number, and then I join that group. But we've got 12 people, and then me is the 13th. So
Welcome.
yeah, thank you.
Yes. Well, I'll start. For me, the most meaningful thing is the get up. Okay. And I just think of my testimony in terms of, as you guys know, I'm a late believer. Age 52 is when I came to the Lord, and it just totally changed my life in terms of what I was pursuing. Instead of the false gods, now I found, so the true Savior. So my whole life actually changed in terms of what I was aspiring to do, particularly professionally. Okay. So anyway, that's kind of why I chose the very fact of getting up, because, that changed the whole man's life. He was able to get up and walk, and he didn't have to sit for 38 years by that pool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Wasn't your work, you were a professor somewhere, and wasn't it your work that was actually part of this? Didn't you lose a job or get?
Yeah, I had gone from academics to business, and over the years, I was given a number 2 position up in Maine as the vice president of operations. And after 5 weeks there, I got fired.
Wow.
Mainly because during a meeting where we were trying to set up the licensing of the product, the guy that was subcontracting for that from the Netherlands came over there, and he was a salesperson. He tried to take over the meeting, and I more or less, in probably not an undiplomatic way, or I tried to be diplomatic about it, was, you should leave it to us who've gone through this and had experience in this area, because, he wanted it right away. And I was telling him that this process takes a long time, and, you have to do it right if you want to get there. So my mistake was the president didn't attend the meeting. And so immediately after the meeting, he went and talked to the president. And that was probably the mistake I made, was not to go and warn him that this guy was probably going to come in and complain about me.
Yeah.
So the next morning when I came into work, the president and his, next admin person was saying, he just told me we have to let you go. And then 3 months later, I had to stay there up there for a parachute. So I have to go in each day and whatever. But I did my job. I went in there and kept the licensing thing going and whatever. And so at the end of my parachute, the president invited me out to lunch with the new vice president of operations. And they more or less told me they had made a mistake because they were going through the same thing with the guy. The new guy was going through the same thing with him. So at any rate, it was a dark moment for me, but now I look back at it and I said, if that hadn't happened, I would have never come to the Lord. I would have probably just gone my merry way the way I was going.
Isn't that something, how that works out? It's so horrible at the time, but in retrospect, you're actually saying that was
Yeah, that's my mountaintop, actually, instead of my dark valley.
Yeah. Well,
It
good
sort of
story.
speaks, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It sort of speaks to the integration as well, Tatsi. In a sense that part of your story is integrated into who you are now, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seemed like for me the walk was what is most meaningful to me at this point. Since I suppose, to use the opposite of what you said, Tatsi, I was an early believer. So there wasn't the getting up wasn't so dramatic when it's a decision in childhood. But the long road, so to speak, from there to here, is sort of brings to mind walking for me. You gotta get up and show up every day, and God's there to meet you when you show up.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, that's good.
Well, I can say that as I've gone through my walk, where I'm no longer an early believer, I'm now in, the next 2 and 3 types of things. So, in terms of picking up my pallet and walking in. And then, Jeff's thing about actually, being aware of that so you don't relapse into that. And, and I relapse into that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Michael. Yeah.
I guess for me, all of the above, and maybe the reason for that is I kind of have the same background that Steve does, except not as long of a road so far. But anyway,
Just because of your age.
yeah. But anyway, I was just thinking that all of it comes down to understanding what has been provided, so to speak. And maybe like with his bed, I think of it as, rather than carrying a burden, continuing to appreciate what has been provided.
Huh.
And God doesn't provide things by accident. So what he has provided you, he intended you to have, kind of a thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think
All
that's
along
good.
your walk, whether you're, anyway, that's my thought.
That ties, that's a really good thought, Mike. I'm appreciative of that. And it ties exactly in with what Tatsu was saying, that getting fired was actually a mountaintop experience for him.
Yeah.
That's putting a firing in an entirely different frame of reference. I think for me, well, I know for me that, of course, I've had a head start on this, guys. I've been working on it for a week. So walking like Steve and Mike, to me, my mind did not go back to my former days as much, but walking on a daily, day by day. Steve mentioned it, showing up, but honestly, I am absolutely loving this stage of life. I love to wake up in the morning. I love Wednesdays. I mean, I got up at 2 a.m. last night to do my 2 a.m. trip to the bathroom, and I go, it's Wednesday. We get to get together again. And so I'm enjoying life and the walk. And there was a time when that wasn't so much. It was more forced, more duty, more warrior, more make it happen. But that's just, those days are gone now, where the daily, no, it's not like I don't have struggle still, but it just less bothers me today than it did 10 years ago. I mean, less bothers me. It takes more to bother. I'm not bothered by as much. Now, on the other hand, I find myself getting more quickly irritated. Traffic and just various things, waiting in lines and things. I find irritation starting to come up more than former. But yet on the other hand, I'm able to catch it and say, "Go, get a grip here." It's not that big a deal. and I absolutely love that. The joy of being able to live another day and to see the beauty outdoors and what is around us here where we live is just guys, I'm really enjoying the walk.
So were you able to get out? Well, here's my problem is a lot of times what happens is my works, my service or whatever, kind of starts dominating it because I start figuring out what I can't do. And, so I get to where the joy does disappear out of what I'm doing. So how were you able to transcend from that? Because you're always so busy with so many things.
Yeah. So are you saying what is the emotional feeling that when you start to go into that funk, whatever you want to call it, Tatsi, what is the feeling that you're feeling about the works? Talk about works. What is it about works that is frustrating?
Is that I can't get it done fast enough or well enough, or I think what is in back of it is I'm worrying about what other people think if I don't get it done, type of a thing. I think that's the largest element. Yeah. And I think that's tied into what I definitely had before I was saved, and which I kind of relapse into, which is a racial inferiority complex of being, Japanese in a white society type of thing.
Yeah, you've talked about that several times. Okay. Well, before what I'd like to hear what Mike and Steve have to say about this. I'm certainly free to talk about my story, but I'd like what Steve and Mike. What do you guys think about what Tatsi's asking? So.
I guess at this stage of life, the perspective is sort of well, I know I don't guess, it's different. Because you do sort of catch yourself, like what you were saying, Mike. some of the smaller frustrations, you gain some perspective on those and recognize that they are smaller, the line or the traffic or whatever it is.
Yeah.
When you've had some health threats, or you've seen other people go through health threats, and you realize more and more that every day's a gift.
Yeah.
You sort of recognize that there is a finite number that we're given, and so you need to sort of get a grip on yourself and enjoy those things. But I don't know if I'm answering your question there. I'm sort of rambling here with my monologue. But it is a great stage of life. But it still does take some walking. It's easy for me to become very self-centered in it, because I don't have some of the things that are asked of me that used to be asked of me. Now that both parents are gone, I don't have that elder care responsibility, and I don't have an employer or a boss or supervisor asking of me. So some of my frustration doesn't come from the expectations of others. It comes from the expectations that I have of myself at times. Perfectionism can be a hard taskmaster. So I don't know where I'm going with that, except it does come back to the walk a bit.
And what you're saying ties in with Tatsi's concern. That's the sense I get, Tatsi, from what you're saying, is that when it occurs, you feel like you've got to do more in order to be working maybe towards perfection. Steve used that term. That maybe you're not good enough, so you have to do better. You are good enough, I want to say that, but that that cloud comes in, and for that moment, that's what it sounds like you're feeling, is that I don't measure up. I have to do more in order so I can be accepted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you're not alone by any means. So, Michael, give us some words of wisdom.
Well, I don't know about that, but I was just thinking along those lines, and kind of going back to what you said, Mike. To me, it's a good opportunity to think about, what you've been given and how you can use it, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so, really, it's like you are better than that, or at least if God wants you to be, you can be. So for me, I always have to step back and think about, okay, what has been provided that I can use? And it could be anything from just, an ability to reason to some sort of resources that are there, a lot of times that are just overlooked. And so anyway, that's it for me. So when I get into that situation, I try to stop and just say, okay, well, wait a minute. Did I accidentally throw something away, that I could use, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Or is it really not better to do better? In certain situations, God doesn't provide what it would take to get where I think I want to go. And then I have to say, okay, because that wasn't provided, that isn't where God wants me to go. Does that make sense?
Okay. It kind of not being provided is actually a signal for him.
Yeah, it's a provision.
Maybe defining a different purpose or type of
Yeah.
thing.
So that's what I try to, like, when I'm studying the Bible and whatnot, to think about, okay, because really the Bible is all about that, especially the Old Testament's all about God says, here, I'll provide this for you. And it will be a tremendous blessing to you. In a nutshell, it'll be a tremendous blessing to you if you walk with me. And it'll be a curse to you if you don't walk with me. So then you start saying, okay, I can do better than this. I'm better than this. I could do this. And then, well, wait a minute. Is that really walking with God? is what I'm working so hard on causing me terrible trouble? Maybe it's not walking with God. So take it back, Anyway.
Well, Mike, probably all of us, because we've come to know you. When you were explaining it, I was inside of your head there, and I could just see you there for a moment in a situation where you stop, frustration is starting to well up, and you call time out and you go, well, what are my resources? What have I been given? And I can see you doing that. That's it makes perfect sense. And similar to me, God, the God of provision, like you said, Mike, that so lines with our story in the gospel. One of the main directives, themes within this story of the gospel message is our ability to receive. Jesus is now moving throughout the land of Canaan, or Israel, and he's encountering people, and what we're watching in various degrees is their ability or inability to receive God's provision through him. The story today is the man received it, and we received it. He received it because he got up and he rolled his mat and he walked. I think I was going somewhere with that to kind of get back. I think by continuing, Tatsi and the rest of us, as we as men continue to appreciate and realize and learn how much God loves us and how much God has provided for each of us on a moment by moment. Start with every breath. Mm-hmm. Every breath we take is a gift. Every meal that I receive is a gift. Every encounter that you and I have is a gift. And and for me, the more I realize that and can come into that and walk with that, it opens up a different perspective rather than fighting it.
Yeah.
It's more.
And I think that's one of the problems where I've been worrying about, my basic belief as I've gotten away from my initial experience, is that I'm back into that kind of earning and not just sitting back and receiving God's grace in terms of eternal life, in terms of my new life, and in terms of my eternal life. Yeah. So it's actually gets, for me, even more basic to that is I stop understanding the concept of God's grace for me. So at those particular moments.
Well, and again, you're not alone. You're not alone by any means. And a lot of your background, you and I don't share the same ethnic heritage and the history and so forth. So I'm coming from a different position, but what you're saying is you're not alone by any means. We all, as human beings, we all struggle with that. What you're saying, maybe in different contexts.
I think part of it is linked up to the American way. We've been I was brought up with, the harder you work, the more you're going to obtain or get or success or whatever, that type of thing. It's kind of the basic American way that kind of gets mixed up in all this, at least in my age.
Yeah. And the very story we're reading flies right into the face of that in profound ways. So I'm going to back out. I'm going to leave the meeting, and then I will we'll all rejoin in about a couple minutes here. So see you back.
See you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Hey, Bill.
I'm sorry I'm late. I got caught up.
Oh, you've been golly, I didn't, I don't know how to get around that because we just
No,
broke
that's
all the
okay.
rooms and
I had a professor in college once that made a point of his class started on the hour, and he went over the door and he would lock it at that minute. If you were a minute late, tough luck, you didn't get in.
well, I had no intention of doing that, and it's
No,
good.
that's okay. I was late today, but that's fine.
How long you been here waiting?
Oh,
20 minutes?
about 10 minutes. It's kind of like looking in a mirror. You can check yourself out and then see how old you are, you know. I'm fine, Mike. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. We had a good discussion in our group.
What verse we on?
We're on the story of the paralytic at Bethesda.
Oh, you moved ahead.
Yeah, we're going lightning speed now.
Yeah, you are. Okay.
Here the guys are coming back from their rooms. And look who joined us. Bill's been in the waiting room drinking coffee. So
Been up to North Dakota.
Zoom needs to add a doorbell of some sort. So
So were you getting some extra beauty sleep?
Well,
Early in
listen,
Dakota?
I discovered, I was in North Dakota, yes, and I got a little late. I told Mike I had a professor in college that when the class started on the hour, at that second, he would walk to the door and lock it. If you were 2 seconds late, it's tough luck. You didn't get in, you know?
Wow.
Well, I kind of felt like that.
That's against the fire code.
Well, Bill, thanks for joining us. And the question that we asked the group was based on the command, or actually I'm calling it an invitation to the man, Bill. Get up, take up your bedroll or your mat and walk. And so our discussion as group, as breakout room, was to each of us go around and tell the others which of those 3 invitations are most meaningful at this stage of life. So from the groups, let's hear from the groups. We have 15 minutes. What are some of the comments that stood out to you guys?
Go ahead, Bob or Art. I'm having a coughing fit.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
I think in our group, we didn't know where we were at, but Dave came up with the analogy that the mat kind of represents a gift or our current state, and the take it up is like a gift of getting a brand new 4-wheel drive vehicle, and instead of taking it out and putting it all over the roads or the backcountry, you leave it parked in the garage. You don't take advantage of what's been given.
Do, yeah. Oh, that's
but
good.
But we also came up with, okay, the mat represents where we were, and if we don't know where we were, it's hard to explain where we are, where we're going, or what we or the gift that we've been given, and be able to share that with other people.
Yeah.
So that they can see where we were and where we are now.
So what I hear your group talked about is actually maybe the advantage and the disadvantage of picking up your mat.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We focused on the fact of, why would you do that? And what we kept coming back to in this example was, well, we do that because that's what the Lord said. He didn't say leave your mat. He said pick it up. So there's got to be purpose in that.
Yeah.
So Dave, why did he say to the rich young ruler, sell all you got and come and follow me?
Because each of us is different, and he knows each of us intimately. And in the case of the ruler, I have to believe that he knew that the ruler's past would be a great hindrance to him if he carried it with him. This paralytic, I think Jesus knew that his past would be a tremendous advantage to him in his testimony about what had happened to him.
I think we also talked about pain, and that part of the mat is, it may allow us to have more compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we carry our mat and carry those experiences that have drawn us closer to Christ, we have an easier time. Is that the right word? Or at least more open to compassion to others.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Jesus didn't say, follow me. He just said, take up your mat and walk, right?
Yeah.
Well, we also saw that walking away from that, we walk, and this guy walked in a different kind of trust. The woman at the well walked in a different kind of trust. The guy walking back 25 miles walked in a different kind of trust.
Yeah.
And so that business of walking, all of these people that Jesus dealt with had to walk on, but they walk now in a newness of knowing Christ in a new way. I think it's really quite beautiful.
I like that, Everett. That's so good. Every one of these stories has to do with walking.
They do. The other thing interesting, Mike, that I was drawn to when you gave the 4 examples starting out.
Yes.
Far,
Yeah.
it's interesting to me to note that 2 of those occurrences were in Jerusalem and 2 of them were somewhere else.
Huh. Yeah.
And I think there's value in that message
I
to
do.
realize that what the Lord does and who he does it through is not just within the confines of a gathering, of a tabernacle, but we carry that charge and that ability wherever we are, whether we're in quote unquote our group or whether we're out somewhere else, out of our regular comfort zones.
That's very good. Yes. Geographic location is a big deal here. It would have been a big deal to the first century readers.
Now, the one when he had the demoniac on the other side of the lake, he healed him. He's going to follow him. He says, no, go back to your town or your place, and do your stuff here. So he kind of sends them in different directions depending on the environment.
Yeah.
Mike, in our group, it was funny how it seemed like each one of those kind of spoke to one of us in our group. And Dick was saying that the get up part was the one that was most meaningful to him. And we talked about part of that question was the implication. So if you never get up, then you stay stuck where you are. If you never take up your mat, then you don't realize the magnitude of the things that you've been forgiven. And if you never do that, then you never walk. So you never get to the point where you're taking that gift that Art was talking about out to where people can see the change that's happened in your life. So there's implications in each one of those phases that if you stop right there, or you don't take advantage in the first place, then you remain crippled. And the other thing that kind of came up was he asked, do you want to get well?
Yeah.
And there are people in this life that answer that question, no. They want to stay where they are. They don't realize, for one, that they're crippled. They're stuck in this world, and they don't realize the magnitude of the disease or the crippling condition that they have, and their answer is no. So I think Dick was right. If we answer that first question and we get up, then that's the start of the journey. But there are times also when we can get stuck and not walk on, because I'm standing there staring at my mat and getting stuck in the past of my sins or whatever, and I never get beyond that, and I don't realize that, hey, I've been forgiven so much that I need to take that, I need to walk with that and give that to
Yeah, Jeff, I love the imagery of that man near the pool. I can see that man stand up and roll his bedroll and put it under his arm like I depicted in the slide and walk out of that place. That's just a powerful image to me of what it means to walk on the daily path, to walk daily in remembrance, but yet moving ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, he was.
That Jesus is really some of life's paradigms or methodologies that we think is the way life works. Jesus kind of shakes you and shows you that this is not how it works. You think you're not supposed to talk to Samaritan women, but here we go, we're doing this. And with Peter on the roof, and God shows us this cloud of dirty animals and eat. And like, no, we don't eat these things. You're not supposed to. Well, now you are. And we're not supposed to carry our bed on the Sabbath. Well, you're doing it now. A lot of the stuff that, we just get used to doing, thinking this is the right way it's supposed to be. I think Jesus is showing that you don't get locked into a methodology that's not working for you. Follow me and listen to what I'm saying, and it may be outside of your normal pattern, but it's still me talking to you, so do it.
Yeah.
It seems the guy said he learned, it's like Jesus had to do some interviewing, either people standing around or maybe the man. He asked about this guy. He had to learn something. Oh, this guy's been here a long time, There's sort of he didn't just walk into the scene. He asked some questions and then addressed the man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll kind of move towards wrapping up now. Thank you guys for sharing. And again, a really powerful, great story. I love the imagery, and I'll be carrying this imagery in my head for quite some time. And this story, the last little short phrase, is a postscript to introduce next week, which will also be a great story, because we're going to see how this marvelous miracle is perceived amongst a certain sector of people. And that should really be a fun and enjoyable ride next week that we'll look at it. And then I just want to leave you with this question, it's just more of a reflective question, because I'm seeing the gospel according to John as an invitation to receive Christ. And we're seeing Jesus now moving throughout society and talking with people from various backgrounds and physical and social conditions. And this common denominator that I'm seeing is this idea of receiving Jesus. We're learning about what it looks like to receive Jesus. And so here I'm posing this question: could this story be yet another example of what it looks like to receive Jesus? And that's what I'll leave with you guys for this week. And we'll look forward to another really great time. I'm really enjoying these discussions. So, and my guess you are too, because
Yes.
we all just keep showing up. So we'll see you guys. If not before, we'll see you next week. Have a good
Mike,
rest
could
of
I
the
make
week.
Can I make a quick announcement?
Of course, yeah.
Well, you guys probably already know that tomorrow's the National Day of Prayer. And if you want to be involved, other than your own personal prayer time, if you want to be involved in it in a different way, between 6 and 8 o'clock tomorrow night, Franklin Graham's son, Will, is going to be leading a 2-hour prayer session on, I think it's on God TV or Daystar, something like that. And they'll be praying for the different sectors of our nation. So I just want to bring it to your attention in case you want to participate in that.
Yeah. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you, Dick.
Thanks,
Yep.
Dick.
All righty. I'm going to sign off now. Have a good week, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Mike.
Bye.
Mike.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.